ora koutou, ko Fiona ahau, he mokopuna ahau o Ngāti Pāhuera ki te taho tōku papa, he mokopuna o Christina Nielsen ki te taho tōku mama. This set of shelves my dad made for me. He passed away about 8 years ago. And on this set of shelves, you'll see my Kewpie dolls, the place I want to go to when we're unlocked. That's Japan. And on the top shelf, you'll see the decluttering that my mother's going through at the moment at nearly the age of 91. The little things she's lost sentimental attachment to that I'm just trying to pick up and accumulate and put on my shelf as reminders of her. Kia ora.
Kia ora everyone, ko te reira tēnei. Ko Ngāti Pākehā ahau, son of dairy farmers from the North Waikato, and grew up doing a lot of building and construction, and also grew up actually on a property that'd been in the family, I think now for 4 generations. My father has never moved. Well, actually he moved across the paddock to a house they built when they got married, and then they took down the old homestead a few years ago, and he moved back to literally the exact spot where they've built a new house. So there's I'm thinking of that sense of kind of permanence in a way. This is a photo of a garage at a place I've just purchased and moved to recently that we thought would probably be living in, for divorce notwithstanding, many years. And that ability then to spend money on doing things like lining the garage. There was a garage, as you can see, it pretty much looked like that, and I thought I would line it just to make it aesthetically more attractive, because I'm going to be putting stuff in there for possibly the next 20 years, and the kind of privilege that comes along with that.
Kia ora, Leilani. It's great to see you.
Kia ora. So I'm Leilani. I'm in Ottawa, Canada, and I live on the banks of the Kitchissippi River. And the Kitchissippi River is Anishinaabe territory. I walk my dog, who you're seeing there, Bean. I walk my dog along the banks of the Kitchissippi pretty much every day. So this photo, it's the front entrance to my home, and it's summertime, hence the flowers. I think I chose it because Bean, that little Australian shepherd, is in fact my home, and he is where my heart is most of the time.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Right to Housing game show. I'm Victoria and let's play. First up, let's hit Leilani with the tough questions first.
I've got a starter for 10, Brennan, just a simple one. What's wrong with our housing system, Leilani?
Just one thing? The number one thing that's wrong with it?
Yeah.
The number one thing that's wrong with New Zealand's housing system, with Aotearoa's housing system, is the fact that you do not have a national rights-based housing strategy in place with accountability mechanisms.
What sort of accountabilities will we be looking for?
Governments are accountable to people. And so that's what the accountability mechanism would do, but it would make sure that your housing system is meeting the actual needs of the most disadvantaged and marginalized people in Aotearoa. And that's what's so beautiful about the human rights approach to a strategy. It forces a focus on the most disadvantaged and marginalized communities, and it has to address actual need, which suggests you need to know what the need is in order to meet it. And to know what the need is, you have to actually consult with the communities that are in need. It's like the perfect system.
I've got a follow-up question for 5 points. What would a national rights-based housing system look like? What does that mean?
So you need a strategy before the system. The strategy should have an impact on the system. So what you want is a national rights-based housing strategy that then dictates what your system looks like. And what that would do is it would put certain curb the uber commodification of housing that happens in Aotearoa, I think if I were to be asked, like, what's the next most problematic thing about your system, I would say it's that certainly within colonial society in New Zealand, there is this sense that housing is a commodity amongst like pretty much everyone. So going back, a rights-based housing strategy would curb the uber commodification. It would address Indigenous and Pacifica housing needs specifically. That might mean access to more social housing. It might mean access to more benefits to make it possible to access housing for those populations. It would mean ending homelessness and putting in measures to prevent homelessness. It would mean making sure no one was evicted into homelessness. That gives you a flavor. Does that sound any different than what's going on now?
I'm going to give you bonus points for that. I'm going to give you seven out of 5 for that.
I love it. Thank you.
Too much praise too early, brother.
Oh well, I like to encourage people, and then it's
then
the New Zealand way. I'm going to encourage Leilani, and then at the very end, I'm going to cut her down.
So can you explain the global battle between finance and capitalism and people and human rights?
In 20 seconds. Sure. Since the global financial crisis in particular, we've seen a huge change in the housing landscape globally. What we've seen is big institutional investors like private equity firms and pension funds move into the housing sector and buy up affordable housing, make it less affordable so that they can get a good return on their investment and so they can leverage more capital off of properties. And that is coming up against the human right to housing because affordability is a cornerstone of the right to housing and security of tenure is a cornerstone of the right to housing. And this new mode of buying up properties for investment's sake is really challenging affordability and security of tenure, because if people can't afford their homes, they lose their security. In a nutshell, that's what I'm seeing.
Can I have another follow-up question for 5 points? Are we an outlier in what's happening here at the moment with the lack of affordability, the security of tenure, and the rapidly increasing prices? Are we globally an outlier, or are we similar to a lot of the other sort of westernized countries?
Just pause for a moment because I'm going to give you 11 points just for that question, Radar.
So the upward trends in New Zealand in terms of housing costs, increase in rents, lack of affordable supply, global pattern. The fact that you don't have the big institutional investors in your residential accommodation, an outlier in terms of Western countries. That's an outlier. So if you can keep them out, you'll be good. You'll be good to do that, to keep them out. You do have those big institutional investors in retirement homes. And I don't just mean those institutional ones. I mean like retirement villages or whatever, like where there's like a lot of homes and it's for older people. They have penetrated your that part of your residential housing system.
So when you were here, you met with like government officials for like 3 days. And we've noticed that there's been a big shift from really healthy lunches more towards like custard squares and chocolate slices. Did you find that was, what was your experience? Was the catering good with the New Zealand government? Because I'd be embarrassed, you know.
If I recall, it wasn't the best. It wasn't the best. You see, now, was it my assistant, you know, because sometimes my assistant would make it very clear what the rapporteur's needs were, like, you know, you know what, though, I have to say, you had the best chocolate next to Geneva. I mean, that Whitaker's chocolate, the small chunky bars, but I purchased those myself. In fact, Brendan, I think you purchased some for me at some point. The wine, I can't say anything like bad about the wine, which
the New Zealand government didn't give you wine or chocolate, did they?
No wine,
No.
no chocolate.
Okay.
I don't remember too many catered meals from the New Zealand government. And I don't remember coffees and teas in the middle of meetings either.
Because I'm
This is embarrassing.
I'm thinking of branching out into the right to catering.
Oh,
Good catering, the right to adequate catering.
That's it.
you want those gestation peanut slab. What sort of wine goes with a peanut slab? What goes with an almond slab?
Any kind.
Oh, it's got to be a
Sauvignon
red.
Blanc.
Yeah, I
Surely.
think
No, I was with the Sauvignon, really crisp, really cold with the milk chocolate and the nuts. It works for me.
Is there anything that Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand doesn't work for you with, Leilani?
Fair. 20 points.
All right. So
So what's stopping us from doing something about our housing crisis? What, the answer seems really straightforward. What's the problem? Was it you as a Canadian that they weren't going to listen to you, or was there something?
No, I felt that the government actually was listening to me. I felt that government was very respectful, and I found the city level governments that I met with whom I met also to be very respectful. I think there is some difficulty in understanding what the value of embracing a human rights approach is. And that takes time. You have to kind of chip away at that. Because it's fairly new, then it's not as a deep understanding. And I think some politics were at play. I mean, I think, capital gains tax is a good example of how it's so obvious that capital gains on secondary homes, for example, that's a no-brainer. It's a way for government to raise resources, to gain resources. But that's a political hot potato in your country, for example. So politics for sure at play.
I think there's also sort of that NIMBY thing, not in my backyard. It's like, yeah, sure, talk about your human rights stuff, but don't do it in a way that impacts on me and my ability to benefit from the system. It's put it somewhere else. It's like we always need to build new cities where human rights and the right to housing are exercised.
Based on a conversation I had the other day with a very wealthy New Zealander who had made his money in commercial property in the UK, and he's back here now, and he's using, I guess, is there a philanthropic capitalism to build low-cost housing or good housing, but then that people can then rent for very long terms, and that his business then maintains that vertical ownership. They build it, they maintain it, they look after the leases, because what they want is people in there for a very long time. They don't want to be having tenants moving in and out. They want to make sure that what they build, they're going to own. They're going to have to maintain that. So they don't want it to be crappy kind of housing stock. Can philanthropic capitalism of that nature help us down here? Or is that, and is that a good notion or a bad notion?
Is that a question for me?
Yes, it is, Leilani.
300
And
points.
also Fiona and Brennan.
Oh, there you go. Well, thanks for that question, Radar. I am on record as saying that I don't necessarily think capitalism is the biggest problem. It's unbridled capitalism that's the problem. And I do feel strongly that we need to see if capitalism can be responsive to human rights. We haven't actually done that. We haven't really tried to make capitalism responsive to human rights. If we go down that path and we find we're failing, if we make a real effort and we're failing, well, then we maybe need to look at other systems. But I think what you just described is very interesting. I prefer tenancies in perpetuity that can be passed on to family members where that's appropriate. But nevertheless, that's an interesting model. I prefer not to call them philanthropic models, rather just call them reasonable models or human rights compliant models. At the same time, I don't like to foreclose home ownership for the most marginalized communities at this point in time, just as there's this new kind of awakening and understanding that anti-Black, anti-brown racism isn't cool, just as we're starting to embrace that, I don't know that I want to see a complete, let's shift then to rental, because I think there are some in those communities who should be given the opportunity to own as well. So I'm a bit of an outlier on that, I think. But I feel like, oh, isn't that funny and convenient? Just as we start understanding the problems of colonialism around property and home ownership, et cetera, just as we start to get it, we're going to close off those opportunities for those communities. Seems unfair to me.
Yeah, and I mean, Māori have been suckered like this before. Don't go into home ownership, go into state housing, because you'll have a state house for life. You know, and the Warriors, this philanthropic route is just another, sucking people into a system that profits from them rather than invests in them and the future generations.
Kia ora. Points for that very messy session of 15 minutes of game show. How did Leilani do out of a total of 63?
Out of a total of 63. I'm dying to know. Oh, I can't see. 57.34.
I gave her 60. I put 64. I gave you 64 because I thought you you actually excelled and answered some things and provoked some conversation that I wasn't anticipating from the questions. I gave you more points. Also, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed on behalf of us that you didn't get decent catering, and so I've given you more points as part of trying to overcome my national shame.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I took points off because there weren't enough laughs. It's like,
yeah, I'm a downer.
All right. Well, let's.
Human rights, hey? It's like, surely you have the right to laugh.
We've actually got a question in here by text message. It's 3157 if anyone's wanting to text in. So Leilani, I think this person must know your work because they're saying you visited 10 countries while you were the special rapporteur. On the global scale, we're just sort of wondering about construction techniques. Did you generally find that straw, branches, or bricks were the best construction methods?
Neither, actually. It's the strongest construction that I saw was a mixture of clay and it's not really clay, but it's kind of like clay and straw.
I'll make sure that gets texted back to that silly respondent.
I think you'll find it better than straw.
It
is a very good. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, though. You know, what are we actually building houses out of? Literally, is it? And people have built houses for thousands of years, and yet, as you would probably know, here in New Zealand, we faced a massive housing crisis a few years ago of people who did invest in houses, and then suddenly had to literally reinvest because their houses were crap and started to fall down. So, maybe some straw would have been pretty handy in some of those leaky buildings, and that's an ongoing. That's one of those other things around, I suppose, it's not only the privilege of owning houses, it's the risk of owning a house. If you purchase something under the belief that it's a good thing, and then suddenly your life savings are ripped away because the construction was shoddy and you're forced to do something about that, that's equally as bad, I suppose. Is it? That's the question then, is it?
Well, I think the 38% of our existing housing stock that was built between 1950 and 1985, if you had put straw in the walls, you would have multiplied the insulation value of the house by about 800,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you had your garage picture today, I thought, isn't it interesting? You've stripped that back and you've found good foundations to your home. All those people who started stripping back and it just got worse and worse with every layer, they stripped away until it just vanished.
Yeah. And to be honest, I did have a conversation with myself as to whether or not I was going to insulate my garage. Because I've just actually stripped out a lot of walls on a 1963 ex-state house. And of course, literally once you pull the sort of the jib off, very, very solid house, not going to fall down, but you can see through those weatherboards. You can see that light. There's no insulation in those walls whatsoever.
Kia ora, and Leilani, sorry, I'm rolling along now, but listen, Leilani, I hear your new project's called The Shift. Does that mean that you bought a new house? You're moving?
I moved from being rapporteur to The Shift, but I'm not moving houses.
All right, well, let's play What the Fuck Does That Mean?
Great.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Leilani, this is from the World Bank. And here is
you're
the
telling
quote.
me who it's from. Okay. And here's the quote. Okay, I'm listening.
This paper articulates the housing policy of the World Bank as it has evolved during the 1980s and early 1990s and proposes a number of important new policy directions for both the bank and its borrowers.
Leilani, sidebar. Who are the borrowers of the World Bank?
Governments, countries.
Correct. 8 out of 10. You're a little slow.
It advocates the reform of government policies, institutions, and regulations to enable housing markets to work more efficiently, and a move away from the limited, project-based support of public agencies engaged in the production and financing of housing. Governments are advised to abandon their earlier role as producers of housing and to adopt an enabling role of managing the housing sector as a whole. This fundamental shift is necessary if housing problems are to be addressed at a scale commensurate with their magnitude to improve substantially the housing conditions of the poor, and if the housing sector is to be managed as a major economic sector.
Oh,
Leilani,
my God.
Farha,
What year was that from?
what the fuck does that mean?
So what the fuck does that mean? That means neoliberalism. Yay! That's all. That's all.
That's all.
Governments, step back. Don't be involved in the business of housing. All you should do is kind of manage on the outside. Let the market do its thing, and all will be shit. Sorry.
So we stepped right into that, eh? We went, oh, advice, let's take it. And we did it.
It's unbelievable.
What I particularly enjoyed about that was we talked earlier on around that kind of Nordic thing of this, and then I saw the classic one, Fiona, with the like we have that. Like no.
Yeah, that's a classic quote. Thank you for that, Brandon. You got to send that to me. I got to use that sometime or other.
I did send it to you so that you could prep your answer, but
right.
All good. I'm trying to work out which one of these is yours, but I can't have put any of your ones on because they wouldn't have been boring. Yeah. But I do like this one.
When the acute misery of the urban poor began to be revealed by social reformers in Europe and North America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, governments began to provide housing assistance to individuals and households and to supply housing directly. By the middle of the 20th century, many developing countries experienced rapid urbanization characterized by precarious dwellings and a severe lack of basic services and infrastructure. During the same period, the situation was different in most formally planned economies, where the state was responsible for providing all citizens with adequate housing and the model of centrally planned construction of state rental housing was applied.
Leilani, what the fuck does that mean?
Sorry, I was, what does it mean? It means, at a certain period of, sorry, you know what I lost? I don't know what it means.
Okay. Well, that was a pretty useful UN report, wasn't it?
I don't want to cast aspersions on my predecessor. I got distracted because I was trying to figure out, so I really didn't hear the whole thing.
No, not at all.
There was state provision of housing. Is that what informal markets? Is that what?
I don't know. I don't know. I can't.
Anyone else? Radar? Fiona? What the fuck did that mean?
Oh, I just know that, a lot of what's talked about here is the state involvement in housing in the era of the Cold War to ensure that people got a bit of the country to stop the tipping over into communism. So it was about people being able to own a little bit and investing in the country. And that state houses were part of that, moving people into sleeper suburbs.
For me, that was about, the transition from planned economies to market economies. So what it's referring to is that New Zealand and many, many other countries were planned economies where the government basically planned the economy by deciding what sectors and what infrastructure and what industries they'd invest in, and therefore kind of basically controlled GDP. And of course, what marketization did was say, well, that's kind of the wrong thing to do because people should just buy what they like and produce what they like, and including in housing, and then we should, and then everything will be better because we'll be concentrating on business and economy and profit instead of the people in our society. So, naturally, that's going to end up in a better outcome. right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Dog eat
All right.
dog. Dog. I would summarize that as a shift from a caring society to a dog eat dog society.
Oh, it's nice. It's a 10 out of 10.
Although my dog would never eat another dog.
No. No.
Wow.
That's
That
how
was
I
something that I
was.
can't even say.
Radar?
Yes.
That's
Sorry,
what
I was just trying to figure out the chances of Leilani's dog actually eating another dog. And like, it
Did
looks
you
like a nice
see?
dog, but it,
Yeah, did you see
yeah,
that
but
little
you know,
dog? So
you know, when you
cute.
strip away, even us, we would say none of us would turn. We wouldn't think, hey, Brennan looks tasty, but you put us in the right situation where you know,
Yeah.
who are we going to eat?
I'm
Brennan.
going to leave that.
Yeah. That one on the table. But thanks for the sentiment, Radar. I appreciate it.
Yeah, don't
That's
get on a
right. Hey,
plane
look,
over
I've grown
about-
up around you know, cats are gonna, if you die in your house, your cat's gonna eat you. I've grown up around pigs. They don't even care. All they want to do is escape or eat, and they have to eat you to escape. They'll do it. You know, animals, and we are not far removed from them.
So listen, Leilani, there's some really great young leadership around the world at the moment. Justin Trudeau, what do you score him out of 10 for like looks, basically?
Compared to Ardern in terms of her looks?
Well, no, the next question is about whether they got together and whether they make a cute couple. So, I mean,
okay. I think he's like, as far as world leaders go, G7 leader, right? We're Canada's a G7 country. I'd say he's right up there. I would have to be honest about that. Yeah, definitely. I'd give him an 8.5. And now with COVID hair, I might give him a 9.
COVID hair, what does that mean?
Well, you know, we can't get our hair cut because we can't go to a salon. So he's got like more hair. And as you know, most male leaders don't have any hair or not enough hair or whatever. And he's got like a lot of hair. And so I give him a 9.
All right. Excellent. And speaking of great leaders, great young leaders with lots of hair, I mean, the other one who's obviously front of mind at the moment is Joe Biden.
Great young leaders with no hair, with a lot of hair. Yeah. Joe Biden.
Okay, well, obviously we don't have a great deal to say about that. No,
I do have something to say about Joe Biden.
Oh.
Joe Biden is going to make some of the so-called progressive leaders out there look pretty darn conservative sometime soon.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
What's a progressive leader?
Well, I think New Zealand has a progressive leader, honestly. I mean, I'm talking standard, like against each other. We're measuring them against each other. We're not measuring them against real, progressive thought.
All right.
Or action.
So just take a pause to a moment to answer this one. Who's the person in the world that you know of at the moment who's most likely to make a great positive change?
Oh God.
It speaks for itself. What about the person on the planet who's most likely to do a whole lot of harm in the next 3 years?
Oh, Putin.
Putin. Tricky. I'll have to talk to my editor about that.
Yeah, I was funny. Oh, you will, Brendan. Your life is on the. I was going to say Elon Musk, actually. And all those people filling space up with space junk, and the sense that we can have a better world by going to another world, which just like.
Yeah.
Let's just brush off this one. No, won't worry about this planet that we're on. We're going to go and set up a new one for better people, just the quality people.
So
where there'll be some excellent housing.
Yeah.
The housing standard will need to be excellent on Mars because you can't go outside.
Don't want to give him any airtime. Yeah, this is true. This is true.
Right. Fiona, do you have a comment? And then we'll do our last question.
I'm kind of not young, but I'm kind of enjoying the Pope at the moment. I think
about
he's
the
doing
Pope.
some progressive stuff, and the Jesuits, the commentary from the Jesuits is really getting in the face of American Catholics that don't like Joe Biden. So I think I'm waiting for the Catholics to really step it up a little bit more for that kindness and social inclusion.
There's a really nice tie, Fiona, between what you just said and the right to housing, believe it or not. And here's a little known fact. So Vatican City actually has member status at the United Nations, right? So they don't have like full voting status, but they sit and they have like a placard and all of that. And for years and years and years and years and years, since the 80s, they have strongly supported the right to housing within the UN human rights system. You know, and out like way ahead of the game. So there you go.
I understand that you talked with the Ministry of Justice, Leilani, while you were here about how human rights work in New Zealand. And I'm just sort of wondering, like, did they say something like, well, actually, generally it's pretty shit? Or did they know? What do you remember?
I remember coming out of that meeting. There were suites at that meeting, first of all. I will say. It was not catered.
It was at our office.
It was at your office. There were suites. I remember that. I remember distinctly putting to them the fact that you in New Zealand have a two-tiered system where civil and political rights are A-OK and kind of understood, and social and economic rights like the right to housing are absolutely not part of the game. And they did not defend themselves against that, my allegation. In other words, they confirmed my allegation that really the right to housing's got second-class status in New Zealand.
Shocking, but unsurprising.
I'm also shocked and unsurprised. And they're kind of a little bit, a little bit like, come on. I just think, I know we've talked about state housing, but I think back to the courage of those governments back then to go, you know what, we're going to do this differently. We're going to reinvent the system, because all systems are created by people and they can be recreated. Where's the clout? But hard to do in a democracy sometimes if you want to retain power to do all those other things.
And Leilani, final question. How is it that any state can sign up to international agreements, for example, in relation to economic and social rights, and not deliver them on the ground?
Very easily.
Oh.
Because we don't have strong enough accountability mechanisms, to be honest. So at the international level, there are accountability mechanisms, but they're kind of weak. They issue recommendations, and unless the government takes them seriously and implements them, they just can walk away, basically. So big role for people on the ground to hold the government's feet to the fire.
Yeah. We often get Pākehā people showing up at the UN saying we haven't managed to do what we promised to do because it was anti our treaty. And so they throw us under the bus, and we can't get the treaty at home, and we can't get human rights on the international stage. And it's a rock and a hard place, playing us off, one another.
Radar, would you mind asking, what is a housing system?
What is a housing system? I can do that. What is a housing system?
And mate,
right.
I don't mean to tell you how to do your job, Leilani, but you could explain the difference between a housing system and a market, in your opinion.
Oh my God, really?
This is easy. You know how to do that.
It's cocktail hour on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And if I was at a cocktail party with you right now, Leilani, that is probably the question I would have asked.